From the Earthship studio in Brisbane, Australia.
5, 4, 3, 2.
Yeah, so a mutual friend of ours from England came and visited the Earthship, didn't he? He came in with his civil engineer daughter, and although she was impressed with what she saw, the building techniques and the engineering of what they call the bond beam, which gives this thing its strength, and she agreed that it probably could survive a high category sort of cyclone or whatever, but in summary though, Mike made the comment that he feels that a little house made of tyres and concrete and dirt has probably devalued the property because it hasn't really dovetailed with the actual house, which is a Queenslander traditional sort of weatherboard house we have up here in Brisbane, isn't it?
Well, I think he's a very British man. He went to one of the top British private schools. Yeah. So he's as English as you can get. He's as English as a plate of stale kippers. Yeah. And so he would, for an Englishman, his home is his castle. Yeah. So he would hate to have a sort of jerry-built structure appear overnight on his property. In fact, I think he said he felt like he was looking at a hobbit house.
That's very nice.
That's right.
I don't know if I want to be a hobbit.
And for him to say that this is a hobbit house, that's probably a good thing. That represents something written by Tolkien.
Yeah. The Shire itself is a very successful economy, isn't it? I mean, it's self-sustaining. They're looking after themselves. It's a thriving community, isn't it? So
that's right.
So maybe you're onto something there. But I've got a oldest daughter this is the architect one who actually got me interested in building this Earthship because she took me along to a university lecture where I got to hear the words of wisdom from the father of Earthships, of course, Mr. Mike Reynolds.
Oh, yes, right.
And I was so taken by this university lecture that I decided to build one in my own backyard. But these days, it's more like a recording studio, isn't it? For the people.
It is.
I talk about someone like yourself coming in and just sitting down and
talk about anything.
Use all the technology.
Because of the way the reticular activating system works, the way the human mind works. We're a goal-seeking machine. We're like an exocet missile, a heat-seeking device. So you have to be very conscious what you're putting into your mind. Yeah. So if you are playing Lynyrd Skynyrd, you need to be not thinking that they perished in flames.
I mean, I don't want to talk about Ronnie Van Zant because I can't talk about Ronnie Van Zant without talking about Neil Young. And if I start talking about Neil Young, we'll be here all night. It's part of my education because I'm always a student of life, I suppose you'd call me.
That's right, yeah.
And I'm always looking at new things to pick up on. And one of the things I picked up, one of the early things I picked up with Neil Young was the song Cortez the Killer.
Oh,
and
yes.
I was particularly interested about why it was banned by Spain. Franco at the time said no. Hernan Cortez is a hero of the Spanish people. You cannot. We will not take this. Cortez the Killer and all this bloody historical inaccuracies. We were not going to take that on the chin. But
I'm not sure if they were inaccurate.
I don't think if you look.
Because the more I've studied the Incas and the Mayans and the Aztecs, they were a very brutal and quite a horrible civilization. They were predators themselves. They
certainly were into human sacrifice, weren't they?
Yeah, and they basically farmed the local tribes. They were the kingpins.
So you're telling me that this guy Cortez coming across this, with his galleons, and as he puts in the song, and giving them, Jesus, that's a good thing.
As things go, I wouldn't be giving Jesus to anybody.
Okay.
But it's probably better, I mean, I've witnessed a Christian church service.
Yeah.
And I saw a guy in robes hold up a chalice with wine in it and say, "This is the blood of Christ."
Yeah.
But it actually just had wine in it. He wasn't fooling anybody. But if you were one of the local peaceful tribes who were living near the Aztecs, a raiding party could just arrive to your village, take all the men away, and they were going to become the sacrifices for that next week. Without the blood, without their heart ripped out of their still living body, and with mountains of blood cascading out of them, the sun would never rise, according to their religion.
That's true.
They needed that blood to be given to their god. And very conveniently, their high priests who coordinated this religion, unfortunately for the Aztecs, their civilization had very little protein, had very little meat. They didn't have, they had no horses to ride on, they had no cattle. I think they might have had some small fowl, very hard to get. Maybe the aristocrats might have got some shipped in from miles away, by hand carried by bearers. So they used to suffer for some of the things that you see, even these days you see vegans suffer from. No vitamin B12. They wouldn't have known that, but they would have been very sick a lot of the time. And so they had a byproduct, because they were literally killing 2,000 sacrifices a week and more in festivals. They would kill at the top of their pyramid, pull the heart out. They would have to make that as painful as possible with the loudest screaming to appease the gods. The fountain of blood would pour down the steps, and they would throw the corpse down the steps where butchers were waiting to take those corpses away, and they were then going into the banquets. And so if you were in the ruling classes, you were eating well. You were eating a lot of protein.
I don't remember this in the song, because Neil Young talks about all the women being beautiful, and
the women, they were beautiful. The ones who were getting to eat all the protein, all the meat, were very beautiful. But this is the thing where
or maybe General Franco was right then. I don't know.
Because the reason that Cortez was able to defeat a much more numerically superior people was because he was aided by the other Indians.
I thought it's because he had the musket.
No, there were not enough. There were only 200 of these guys. He was aided by the tribes, and he had an Aztec woman who had been gifted to him by who
became his sort of like partner.
And she turned out how to gift for languages. So she. I
was going to say. Didn't he kind of befriend? And the Aztecs actually treated this guy Hernan Cortez as this kind of god. So initially it was all goodwill and come in, me old mate. But once he sort of had their trust, he sort of like killed them when they least suspected it, maybe.
That's these things, because to make it a simple story that's condensed into that, these things took place across periods of time. And at one point, a band of Spaniard settlers were taken prisoner by the Aztecs and confined in small chambers and fattened up to be sacrificed. So he used to like to fatten them up for sacrifice as they were going to be eating them. So that was one of the things where that made the Spaniards decide, well, we've got to do a punitive strike on these guys now, because they're having a bit of a laugh at us now. They're eating us. They're starting to eat us. And that is where, particularly as Christians, when your adversaries start to eat you, that gets even Christians who turn the other cheek normally can become very angry. So anyway, I'm not an expert in this, but what I'm saying is that my sympathy isn't as strong as it once was. When I heard the sort of simplified, artistically put together song by Mr. Young.
Neil Young, though, himself would say, well, my body of work, is not really there to be judged, or it's not really my opinion. But he said it's just there on offer to make people think.
Yeah, well, it makes me think that he superficially learned about something and said this would make a good song, in the same way as his song Southern Man.
The fact that, that's right. That's right. Well, the thing about Southern Man is that Ronnie Van Zant actually referenced that song in his classic, Sweet Home Alabama, didn't he?
That's correct. Yes, he did, and he, because again, it's too easy to simplify these things. Yeah. To say, all of the people in the South were evil, slave owners.
He doesn't actually say that in the song Southern Man, does he?
I'm not an expert in that song.
But I think it's safe to say Ronnie Van Zant was offended.
If I was Joe Rogan, I'd be calling out for my fact checker now to bring this to tell me what
we're too low budget
Southern Man. It's certainly something about Southern Man, bit of just hang your head in shame type thing, because of what they did. But these were families who. They didn't, at the time they were living the way people lived then, and they found themselves on the wrong side of history. We see today, we see the statues being toppled even today. Yep. So it was obviously a sore point.
I'm going to change the subject slightly. Because we talked about military service before, but I've made the statement previous to this about. My first 12 months of military service as a 17-year-old, I learnt more in that time than I did in my entire high school education. Because you were actually treated like an adult, and you're put in...
Well, you are. Yeah.
You were exposed to all sorts of things, sometimes quite confrontational scenarios involving the GSIs, the instructors. Yeah. And sometimes within the barrack room yourself, the guys you joined up with, there'd be confrontation there.
There will be, yes.
You'd be going out on a Friday night to the small town where your recruitment base was, and the guys at the time, 1978, you can imagine a group of guys walking around in short hair. Young guys, there's the immediate target. So there's all this, sometimes violence, although at the time it made me feel very uncomfortable, but it's experiences though that I wouldn't trade.
No.
Because, that was only part of it, but you're just put in pressure cooker situations and you were really tested, how you're going to react.
If you lived in one of those towns, like in...
and I was just wondering about your experiences in the military. Was that similar? Or I know you were a conscripted.
No, it's different because of being 20.
And you didn't volunteer like I did.
No, I'd already been working in a multiplicity of factories and hitchhiked all around Australia and seen some situations. So for me, going into the army at 20 was a holiday camp. It was just like a joke. And that,
But didn't you get sent to Vietnam?
In fact, I was that was much later, but certainly the day I arrived, I got so drunk the night before that when I was presented to our lieutenant, a second lieutenant, after we'd been split into platoons, asked me directly if I was an alcoholic. I think his direct words. After I think we had to individually go in and into his hut, into the second lieutenant's hut, and do your best attempt at because we got off a bus. We still had long hair or beards or things.
Yeah, okay.
So we still were in our proper clothes, and we had to get off a bus and one at a time go in to introduce yourself to the lieutenant, and you had to do your best attempt at a salute.
Okay.
Having never done a salute before.
I thought it was a bit like Forrest Gump. One minute he was like doing his training, and the next minute he was on in a rice paddy field or something.
No, there was a lot more to it than that.
In terms of the training, okay.
You had to go through many forms because your basic training was really to whip you into shape, to dehumanise you, and then to rebuild from the ground up a new human in the form the shape of a soldier. So that was the point of it. So they would take you in, and you would have all your individuality about you. It was in the 70s.
Okay.
I mean, at the moment, let's say now, I mean, back then you still had a lot of men who were aggressive. As a young man growing up at school, it would be expected you'd have fights in the schoolyard at lunchtime, and that you'd have to meet people after school and have a punch up. And it was actually respected to be a man in those days. So it wasn't a big deal to go in. You knew that when you're going in the hut, you knew that you had to deport yourself as a man, or you would be humiliated, bullied, and spat out by the system.
I certainly didn't want to glamorise my time in basic training, because I saw some things I wish I really hadn't. And it
you can't have that.
Me. But I mean, it upset me. I'm still glad to have had the experience, if you know what I mean. But there's one guy who was discharged on request, but the GSIs just didn't like him. And they just picked on him and just broke him. And this is a guy within the barrack room who was actually a very popular person. But they just didn't like the look of him.
No, you can't be just popular. Because you may be, your friends their lives may depend on you. You can't have that. You've got to push people to see what their breaking point is. A lot of Australians at that era from the Australian Army they would have worked in a factory, or they'd have, even if they had worked in an office, they probably had done some, manual type work after school or something like that. So people were reasonably fit back then.
But isn't it a different scenario in 2018? I mean, the idea of troops going in and landing on the beach, and storming the cliffs, and that's never going to happen these days, isn't it? You'd be probably more likely just to have a whole room full of drone operators.
No, well, that's. That will work to some extent, but there will always come a time when you need boots on the ground. Because you can't take ownership of a position by just the threat of sending in a drone. And one of the problems that we have as well with a lot of these drones is the collateral damage. If you haven't got forward spotters on the ground directing those targets, you're going to be taking out, a kindergarten full of kiddies. That's going to be then put on all around the world on the headline news that night. And a lot of the time now in a war, it's a psychological battle. It's a battle for, as I said in Vietnam, the hearts and minds. But the hearts and minds of the world are watching.
Just on that point, a few years back, I got issued with this medal for my service, and I decided, that's good. I've got a medal. I'll turn up on Anzac Day, and I'll march there. And as I was saying to Iron Mike, it was a little bit like, this is the closest I'll probably get to what the Beatles experienced. Because you walk in there through Adelaide Street in the city, and it's like screaming people. That's right. There's young people, screaming. They're almost crying. It's like Beatlemania or something.
It is,
But as much as I'd like the one-off experience, I'll never go back again, because I suppose when you think of why do I feel the need to march? Is it is it I mean I did my service, but it's not. It's probably Anzac Day. I'm not too sure. I understand. They talk about Gallipoli, but if you know me, if you do. As in our history books, we were actually the invaders, weren't we?
That's right.
We went into Turkey, and the Jolly Turk, of course, he defended his own country from these, antiquity
very well.
So they talk about but there's a lot of old diggers, like back in the day, the 60s and 70s. We got to talk to Vietnam veterans, but also World War II veterans. And to a man, they don't really want to talk about it. They don't. My understanding is they didn't really like war or what they said.
No one would like it,
kind
would
of
they?
pointless, wasn't it?
Well, why would anyone like it?
And the idea that it's somehow courageous and you're doing it for your country, and it becomes, is there a word called jingoistic?
Well, yeah.
I don't know if that's the right.
Yeah, but that's propaganda. I mean, that's always whipped up.
Yeah,
I mean,
if I was a young man, I don't know if I'd want to necessarily give up my life because some politician can't agree. Yeah,
but now you may want to know more. If you look at the First World War, the wars, even now, there's still debate raging over why the First World War was fought.
Yeah.
And a lot of it has to do with what was happening in Russia, because of communism taking over the alliances. There was a lot of complexity.
Yeah.
And no one actually knew what they really wanted.
Yep.
Which is why they then bogged down in
diplomacy. They certainly failed.
Yeah. So no one knew where the Americans fitted into it. Americans had possibly almost as many German heritage people as English. So for them, there was no reason they should come in on the side of the British. What they need to do, and they could do it then. This is when some of the early psychology was only in its infancy, and they were dabbling in behaviourism and how you can actually manipulate the mind. You can make people believe anything by just saying a lie over and over again. So they were able to whip up the farm hands, and when you think of back in England at the time, it was a very rural. You had some pockets of industrial areas. A lot of guys would be blacksmiths. You'd have some people working in the mills, and then you had your aristocrats living in a very nice areas and going to the posh schools. So they had to whip up the fear of the Hun, the evil Hun. Now the Germans made it easy by having a giant spike on their helmets, a horrible spike thing to make themselves look like beasts.
Yeah.
Now, which they did to strike fear into their people fighting them, but that would make it easy for you as someone who's basically very early form of marketing. This is before the official marketers came to be later on when they started selling cigarettes and everything.
Yeah.
But this is long before that. These guys were saying, right, let's show pictures of the evil Hun. And even the word Hun, harking back to barbarians and invaders. So we'd always have a very evil, dark-looking man with a giant helmet with a huge spike coming out of the middle of it, with a bayonet drawn. They'd show cowering women and children on the receiving end of these bayonets in fear. And then they would have like fresh-faced Englishmen, the Tommy, and they saying,
humble Tommy,
and they'd say, "Come on, lads, will you not come and join us?" So
marketing 101.
Won't you come and join us? And then so they would have the pull factor. First of all, you've dehumanised your enemy. You want nothing better. They're like an insect. You want to spray insect killer on them and kill them, and grind them into the dirt because they're evil, they're terrible. You've also you can suddenly have 20 new friends overnight. And in fact, you could take all your existing friends with you. They often would recruit a whole set of brothers. Would all go. And you could all be in the same trench together. You could take your whole village that you all went to school with all these guys. You'd all go and be in the one platoon. So you could have that camaraderie, from the boring job that you were doing, cleaning up horse shit, like I'll just, and then you then had the push factor.
Front line, and you serve, and you're like at the because at that time.
Well, you didn't know about the front line, so that's
Britain really was Great Britain then, wasn't it? 1915.
No one wants to talk about the front line, but this is all about. Will you not come over?
Yeah, that's right.
Now, when the
the same thing happened in Australia, isn't it? You had the march.
Oh yeah. And then what? You need also a push factor. And that comes from the women, because so you would have some of the as the war went on, and as the big batches of volunteers are already being mopped up. There's some of them coming back with pieces missing off their body. They're bandaged with stumps. They're in a wheelchair, or they're not looking the best. They've got an eye patch. They've got one eye. They've got an arm missing, and maybe both legs have gone.
Yeah.
And this is a young man's come back to the town, and then the local the lassies of the village, the local ladies, they'd be coming up. They might see a strapping man walking down the street. They'd say, "Hey, here's a white feather for you, the white feather of cowardice."
Bloody hell! Oh, this happened in Australia.
I think it happened here as well. It certainly happened in England.
Okay.
Here's your white feather.
Bloody hell!
Young lads are dying over there to fight for the country, and you're over here behind the lines, shirking your job, shirking the, so you get these guys. The guy might have, a bad foot.
Yeah.
Shorter than the other or something like that.
Well, I suppose that's what did my head in, because I probably would be more comfortable if all these crowds were just dead silent.
Oh, okay,
and solemn. Because it was kind of that fervour which I wasn't expecting. Well, I mean, I knew it existed, but to be on the receiving end of it, it did my head in. And also, obviously my spirit of the 60s background, that's like a clear dichotomy with military service, isn't it? Because when Neil Young wrote 4 Dead in Ohio, he wasn't really talking up the National Guard.
Well, that's the thing where, as humans, we're very lucky because our brain isn't one just homogenous thing.
Yeah.
It's not just a big bowl of porridge-looking stuff that you can only have one idea.
Yeah.
Humans are perfectly able to hold multiple conflicting ideas in their head at the same time.
So you're talking about the duality of man?
Probably, not necessarily. The duality of man, I think, is often used to talk about that you have a physical body and an unphysical soul.
Okay.
The dualism theory.
Okay.
Is that what's the difference between us and an animal? Is that we have a physical brain, but what about the essence?
Okay.
How much does your soul weigh? And great minds tried to estimate how much your soul weighed. They actually would weigh a body before and after death.
Yeah.
To see where if the spirit's left the body.
Okay.
And so that's another thing.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about is how you can actually hold contrasting views, points of view.
Yeah.
In the head. So in my case, for example, I was able to take part in anti-war demonstrations, which is very trendy. Yeah, I was marching in moratoriums.
I did not know that.
Through Collins Street. We shut down the centre of Melbourne.
Okay.
To march against this unjust war, insane war.
And the next minute you're putting on the Akubra hat.
That's right.
And marching into Saigon.
Yeah, well, that's right. And I also found myself, after being called up and trained, put through the mill, put through the brainwashing system.
Yep.
Because I didn't go to Vietnam until a year later.
1972 or something.
Or 71. So I went in 70.
Yeah.
And it was more like to the back end of 71 that I was going off overseas. So a lot of things, water flew under the bridge in the lead time to that. You had to be trained in the corps that you joined. You had to go to jungle training, learn to be able to blow up and kill as many people as you could. All very handy skills you could take back into civilian life with you. But, it was I found it very surreal as a young man that my government, using people's tax money, was training me how to set up on a tripod a claymore mine full of 1,000 ball bearings and an explosive charge that, when tripped, would make mincemeat out of my fellow human beings.
Yeah, well, that's that's what happened in Long Tan, isn't it?
Well, had a lot of that happen,
So, but you also would have had the other experience of coming back from Vietnam and having people, get in your face, get in your grill.
But I'd already had it before then. I'd already
being a baby killer or something like that.
But you didn't have to go, because they couldn't tell if you'd been to Vietnam. But so in Sydney, I had the experience of during an intake, like every 3 months was an intake into national service. As a serving army man, I was stationed outside a barracks in Sydney where an intake of young men was coming in. So these were the men a year younger than me coming in. And the whole area was surrounded by protesters. There were middle-aged women, save our sons. These were mothers of young men. These were women ready to attack. They were happy to spit on the men in uniform. And I'd be standing there as if, like you see the guards in Buckingham Palace. You see those guards. So I'm a young man. I've been conscripted. My choice was to do that or go into the jail. So I'm doing what I have told in the army. You must follow orders. I'm there to be on guard duty. And I have women screeching, "You disgust me! You killer! You're taking our son! You beast! You animal! You a lot of other noise! And literally spitting in your face. And that was a bit of an education. On human nature. And I was thinking, so I am being attacked for as if it was me that invented it. They should be talking to the politicians. So that was one of the things that another time I was walking in Sydney in uniform, and had to go and do a chore, do some sort of duty, and I was reporting back to the barracks in Oxford Road. I think it was around the Oxford Road barracks, and I happened to be walking on there when several trucks went past, open top trucks full of students from Sydney University, with protesters on the back of these trucks. Loads of these guys all on there with hangman's nooses and President Johnson is a murderer. All this, and as they went past, they've thrown a whole lot of rubbish. They've literally had big bins of rubbish and rotten fruit, and I've been hit by a hail of rubbish, refuse.
But as you say, you've been on both sides of the fence. You can of understand why, and that kind of leads me to my next point. I mean, that was obviously a time where youth really, if they didn't see like something. In government or from middle-aged people, they would really get in the face of those people and let them know what they were feeling. And part of that expression, I suppose, was through the music. So I talked about Neil Young, 429, but there's a number of other, and everyone was listening to those songs. So there was like a joint. Is there a word called gestalt where people come together and it's like
that's what gestalt is,
But do you think maybe the youth of 2018 are a bit more fractured because people?
There isn't any common. There's no commonality now because everyone listens to different music on
and different voices, like different ideas.
There's music that at that time. Not everyone, but certainly most young people would, if you said Jimi Hendrix or The Doors or any of these groups like that, they would know. Rolling Stones, they would know what you meant. They might have a view. They might say, "Oh, idiots jumping around with long hair," but they'd be aware of them. Whereas now, I could be talking about hip hop artists, and there's a whole range of those, or I could be talking about any number of musical genres, and not everyone knows about them. Because everybody is on their computer. There's no like top 10 really that there used to be.
No, and I was also going to comment that maybe the artists back in the day, and like an artist like Cream, for example, they were actually allowed to fail, weren't they? I mean, the record companies would stick with them. Like they initially released a single called Wrapping Paper, and and it was Eric Clapton's humour, but nobody actually got it. Nobody bought the record, but the record company allowed them to to create. You know, there was a lot more, and I suppose the word I'm looking for is to innovate. So these artists were able to take more risks, and I suppose you know, from current day musicians, you know, if they haven't got, you know, haven't got something that's at the top of that people are interested in, they haven't got visibility. Yeah, it's like they step back. Well, you need to sort this out. We're not going to support you.
But see, Creamer are probably
there's no support, is there?
But there was very little. They weren't that successful. I mean, really, you know, in terms of hits, you know, again, they. I'm not sure how typical, you know, some of the.
But would you say that they were influential?
Like, they were influential in that they were the first supergroup.
But they also talk about, if it wasn't for Cream, they sort of built the gate for other more heavier bands to come through. I'm talking about Black Sabbath, maybe even Deep Purple. I know Deep Purple were around then, but
because the thing is, Deep Purple came through in a movement called the Underground Movement. Yeah, because see these bands like Deep Purple and Black Sabbath, these guys. They would they couldn't be played on the radio. No. So this is one of the problems that there was a multi-tiered music. So you know, you didn't hear a whole. I think the Beatles were the first ones who really pushed the album concept with the Sgt. Peppers, where you had to actually have an album. I mean, if you look back at before, you know, when the Beatles first became popular. People didn't buy albums. No. People bought 45s. If you look at all the Motown, you know, you look at like the Supremes, you look at the Surf, you know, the Beach Boys. People weren't buying. You know, the Beach Boys started to produce albums after they saw how successful the Beatles were. But you were buying. If you were in a good mood, you'd buy an EP. Yeah. You know, with 2 songs on each side. But you had a mono. In the 60, 65, you know, 66 even going on further. You'd have a gramophone, it'd have the ability to play an album, and you wouldn't have many albums because you're only a kid, you know, you're using your pocket money, using your paper round money to buy. So you'd have your collection of singles. And so the Beatles, you know, they're having in the top 100. You know, you started with the top 10, but then it went to the top 100. Yeah. So those are the songs that people were aware of. They were being played on the radio. The problem there was that the radio stations then could manage that. They could decide, they could filter what was coming through. So, and that was when your groups like Deep Purple started to come into play, where they were known as the underground. Yep. Because young kids were wanting to start to play a whole album, and then you started to get your concept albums where you would listen to the whole.
Deep Purple do a really great anti-war song. Is it called Child or something?
Sweet Child of Time.
Sweet Child of Time. Have you read the? I mean, you know the lyrics.
No, I don't. No, I like the song. Yeah. But I'm not aware of it being a war song.
Anti-war song, okay. We're going to have to go to our third person to do the fact checks on that. But it's a classic.
No, I've never heard of it being about anti-war. But it doesn't. It stands on its own feet as a song.
I think you need to get that on the MP3 on the way back down to Canberra. Yeah. And you're literally.
Well, I've got every Deep Purple song, but some of those songs you played to over and over, and. You know, you'd play Smoke on the Water over and over and over again. But, you know, some of these groups, I mean, like the Doors had singles, but you then missed a lot. You missed a lot of their album, because some of their albums, they had songs that went on for hours and stuff.
Well, this is the end.
Yeah, that's right.
Friend, the end.
And the other thing is that some of their stuff was unsuitable for the radio, where they were talking about having sex with their mothers and things like, you know. I forgot about that, you know, good, is it? So there was a lot of censorship, you know. Yeah. So, you know, I mean, Black Sabbath had trouble because a lot of people thought that their songs were about Satan, you know, about the devil or witchcraft.
And the fact that he used to bite the head off bats on stage didn't help.
Yeah, well, this is it. And we've never, there's still debate about that.
Did he do that? I don't know.
No, there's still debate about that.
Was it really a Moro bar or something? Or Mars
No,
bar?
I think I've got a feeling he did do it, but I've seen a lot of interviews, but because there's no record of it, you just have to take their word for it. He admits openly that it doubled, their
revenue.
it just made their profile go much higher. If you're going to be, the Lord of Darkness, it helps that you've bitten a few live animals' heads off.
Do something bizarre.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't.
That was so certainly the. Sometimes when artists try to package and distill, so the Vietnam War went on for decades really, but certainly the American experience started in the early '60s.
Yeah.
And they didn't get out till '75, so it went on for 10 years.
Yep.
So it was really only when you see a film like Apocalypse Now, where an artist has just made their concept of it, put it to music, and that becomes the experience of the war for most people. Because the people even in the war, and this is the reality, this is why when you talk to an old digger from the Second World War, well, that guy might have been stationed on an island. And never seen a Japanese in the whole thing. That's another soldier from his same street in Melbourne. He may have been, the luck of the draw, he may have found himself at the Battle of the... He might have been, he may have actually then spent the rest of his life mentally ill. With post, PTSD,
Absolutely.
which no one even knew what it was. I mean, they used to talk of shell shock.
That's it.
And they used to see it as a sign of weakness, that you were obviously a weak person. You've been succumbed to shell shock due to your weakness.
They used to talk about LMF, didn't they? Lack of moral fibre. Is that right?
Well, that's right. And that was the thing. I mean, and all armies deal with it in different ways.
I've got a slightly funny anecdote from the staff sergeant who I was talking to in the 70s about Vietnam, and he said his name's Staff Sergeant Tucker, and he said with the Americans though, it's particularly around the artillery he was talking about. He said you either want to be standing really close or really far away, because when they start letting rip, if you're anywhere near where those bombs are falling, you're in a whole world of pain.
Well, that's right. And the artillery, the Royal Artillery.
But the reality is a lot of Allied or just troops in general just got killed by their own artillery.
But that happens,
I suppose you call it.
in every war.
The fact that they had a term for it, I suppose it's
every war, because people don't know until the bullets start firing how they're going to react. The Royal Artillery, as you know, have white lanyards.
No, I don't know.
They have white lanyards because of the cowardice.
Okay.
They had the colour taken out of the lanyard because at one of the famous battles, they came under fire, their cannon positions came under fire, and they ran without spiking the cannons. They should never, and which meant that those cannons fell into the hands of the enemy.
Oh, bloody hell.
The number one thing of artillery people is to keep firing until they are at risk of being overrun, in which case they are to spike their guns and blow those cannons up.
Okay.
And so they incurred the disrepute and had to carry that shame, the people who came after. And they referred to in the Australian Army, they referred to those guys, to the artillery, as the 9-mile snipers.
Did you actually manage to see that film American Sniper?
No, I haven't seen that.
I was going to segue into Jesse Ventura and all that sort of stuff, but if you haven't seen the film, it's not.
No, I probably need to. There's a fairly few
really.
films.
It's more of an American thing rather than Australian.
No,
thing,
film
right? And we are. I want to keep it.
Yeah, we don't want to keep it.
Australia, because we are in Australian. And we don't want to sort of interfere with what's going on in America. I mean, we probably do that enough. Don't you feel like in this country, it's almost like we are. Like a an associated state of America. We seem to talk about American politics. In reality, we've got nothing to do with it, have we?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't. But maybe the circles you're in, you know. I mean, I don't have any people that talk about American politics. If I was to talk to my family,
in a way, Australia does follow what America does in a lot of ways. And I don't know if that's a good thing.
I don't know. I mean, because we're subject to so many inputs now.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, over time, you know, as Australia becomes like an Asian country and not a settler country, that'll happen within our own in the next generation.
Well, we'll become a republic.
Well, it doesn't matter what form of government they have. I mean, that doesn't make any difference. I mean, I guess if you want to say that it's not a monarchy, but it can still be a monarchy. I mean, you can have countries like Malaysia could still be in the Commonwealth.
Okay.
You don't have to have white people in it, or, you know, people who are descended from the British.
No. Okay.
I mean, you know, India is you know, still benefits from its association with the Commonwealth, keeps a few things like cricket and things like that, because it's a very valuable networking business arrangement. It allows them to do a lot of business with London, which is one of the central, centres of finance in the world. That gives India a much bigger advantage than someone like China, who weren't in the Commonwealth.
Yeah,
and I have to take my hat off to Neil Young.
Yeah, why? Because you saw him live. No.
Not only is he alive, he spends his evenings in bed with Daryl Hannah.